everything is real and legitimate and stuff. You know, you can excuse things to an extent because of Hollywood-ish stuff, right? Because of being a showman. But that only goes so far. And so his premise of like survive 100 days in a nuclear bunker, if you look at it, he has these two kids, like kind of high school-ish age, I assume, or something, or like just finished middle school or something. Like it depends, you know, kids kind of grow up faster or slower, but they definitely don't look old enough to be adults. But technically you never can know, but it looks like two high school-ish age kids. The immediate problem I know about this is when you talk about experiments and some degree of isolation, there was things like the Stanford prison experiments, which it was simulation of a prison. It had a bunch of people who were volunteer prisoners, and they got paid like $100-something a day to be prisoners for, I think it was like a week or something. And some students were made like prison guards, and it was about emulating a prison environment and about trying to figure out the psychology behind it and stuff. And it's been heavily criticized for being extremely unethical and like inhumane treatment and stuff. And like, you have to be careful about doing stuff like that. But there is also, that was around 1971 or something, like roughly that time. Around 1972, 1973, there was a bunch of experiments that NASA did with sort of shelters built inside of caves, but essentially shelters underground, that were isolation experiments that also like they were trying to test things in relation to space travel and human isolation. And so at least a few people went through this. One guy is Michael Sifry, I believe is how you pronounce his name, or Mitchell Sifry or whatever. He spent time in a cave in Texas for 6 months, and it kind of drove him a little bit insane for obvious reasons. There are health related issues and stuff from just not being exposed to sunlight. A lot of it has to do with depression and some degree of hallucinating and like boredom related problems. You get this weird disassociation where your body starts to get into a day cycle of, instead of 24 hours, your body leans more to a day as if it was 28 to 40 hours. So you'll tend to sleep longer and stay awake longer. So you might sleep 12 hours and be awake 20 hours or something. So there's certain abnormal behavior. Blood tests showing like an immune response happening for no apparent reason. Just sort of random, odd ways that your body react. And there's been a lot of concerns when they were doing these experiments of these being seriously dangerous to people's health. Like, this isn't some kind of joke to just bury someone into the ground and have them be relatively isolated. So if I was like, if this were my kids and this was something like offered to one of them, like one of these kids was my kid, you know, hypothetically, I wouldn't let them do it. Like, this isn't a matter of money. There is some, like, if you proposed this idea to me, I would say it's too dangerous for someone who's a kid. So it's like already, I wouldn't say it's necessarily illegal, although it could very well be, because if they aren't legal adults, they can't consent to things. So you can't sign a legal contract. There are ways to get around that with the approval of a guardian, but I don't know if we're talking about human experimentation. I don't know how far a parent can approve for their kid to be in some kind of human social experiment thing. But like, I wouldn't let a kid do it if they were my kid, because there's legitimate safety concerns. Assuming everything runs correctly, like your body just gets messed up. And so there's other certain things I noticed. Like, I know this isn't too obvious, but you'll see on the kitchen counter here, there's this nostalgia breakfast maker. So it's this thing. And so one of the things that has a reputation of is the coffee maker seems to work fine, but there's people who've complained about, like, you use the toaster oven or the griddle, and especially the griddle has some tendency to like damage the thing. And it can make sense because you have this big plate of metal on top of a toaster oven, and so heat is feeding back into it, and it potentially warps some of the plastic under it. And the problem is, when you have appliances like that, they're a potential safety hazard, because it's an electrical appliance that's sort of melting itself a little bit. And I'm not making this up. Like, this is the common concern behind this appliance. So it's a little bit dangerous.
So this nostalgia 3-in-1, it seemed really cute and cool. And so I started making breakfast in it. This is day 2. I've had it for only 2 days. And trying to cook my breakfast, I noticed that I guess it got so hot that it bent the metal and it doesn't shut down now. You can see everything is installed properly, but it got so hot it bent it out of shape. I'm gonna have to return this. It's not gonna work for me.
So that's, she said it doesn't turn off now, basically. Obviously that's a fire hazard. So it damages itself in a way that's potentially dangerous. So you really want to be aware of like fire hazards inside of an enclosed space because of like airflow. So any kind of fire, you have to be extremely concerned about asphyxiation. So the NASA isolation experiments I was mentioning before, that like Michael Sifry was part of, and some other people were part of, they went into caves, and at least there was like, it was an underground space, but it was kind of open in a way. So I don't think they were as concerned about people asphyxiating because of carbon dioxide or anything like that. So they're right next to the Nostalgia breakfast maker is an electronic induction cooktop. And so one of the biggest pieces of advice I heard people give about cooking inside of a bunker is that you don't do that ever. So I mean, at least it looks like they have a hood over it, which is supposed to help with ventilation. But if you're talking about like a nuclear bunker, they need to be sealed in such a way, like you can't just have a hood over your stove that has exhaust that points out, because it would still be dangerous, because the way when you're talking about fallout in a kind of nuclear related war, like people dropping bombs everywhere, or close enough that you're in the fallout range. What fallout is it, you have a nuclear bomb, like blast everything and kick up dust and stuff that is irradiated dust, and it comes back down and it gets blown by the wind, and so you have these tiny particles of debris that just have radiation in them. And so you need a relatively airtight, like ideally as airtight of a bunker as you can have, to prevent this debris from getting inside. So you can't just have a hood that has an exhaust on it. So if anything, if this is any kind of shelter, there's reasons to believe it's like a storm shelter. So if you go, okay, like they showed the window for a second there, but the cross section, if you look at the cross section up here, like this is misleading, because I mean, obviously this isn't an actual cross section. It's an artist rendition kind of thing of it. But this part on the left couldn't be buried under the ground that slopes up, because all the way on the left, there's clearly what appears to be a door that's the actual main entrance for this shelter. And it's not that uncommon to have like a door entrance and then you go down into the safer part of the shelter. But this is more indicative of like a storm shelter. So stuff like tornadoes, or you can go into a shelter like this possibly for wildfires. I don't know, you might need one that's more airtight for wildfires, because there's still concerns about smoke and stuff. although it's not as dangerous as like nuclear fallout, because if you get any of those sort of dust particles inside of your shelter and they get pushed around and stuff, like any of that dirt, it compromises the entire shelter. So it seems like a storm shelter or something similar to that. And they're, you know, it's a technicality, whatever, right? Who cares? And that's assuming this is legitimate and they didn't build this on a soundstage or anything. Because it would be easy to take like a storm drain pipe and like build an interior to it and stuff and put it on a soundstage and build a platform over it. It would also be easy to find a shelter like this that the insides are fairly gutted and you just build a different interior. So that's probably what they did, something like that. All the way on the right, which they aren't showing, behind the doors where the money is this other shaft that's probably some kind of air vent shaft to encourage airflow through the whole thing. And that's the thing, they like dump money down into the money pit thing and suck money out of the money pit thing. So all the way on the right, they have an air vent shaft thing. So you want two entrances for shelters. So a front door and like a vertical shaft thing would make sense. And this being buried into a hill somewhat. And what supports that, this being a storm shelter, is they do show there's a window in this room that's the bedroom. Like in this room. So it's like 9 out of 10 odds it's like a storm shelter or something. It's not like a nuclear bunker. If you look at this, if we're talking about 100 days, a lot of shelters are more built for like 2 weeks or, you know, like a few weeks or whatever, because there are logistical problems to trying to spend extended periods underground. And so if you look at this, like, this is a tiny hotel fridge and a tiny freezer. The tiny hotel freezers don't work, basically. They don't really keep things frozen. Tiny fridges like this can only hold an extremely limited amount of food. It wouldn't make sense to have something like this if you think you could maintain refrigeration in a shelter like this. So like this is functionally kind of a luxury. Like there's nothing like long-term storage. Like this isn't useful if you're thinking of survival. It's a drain on electricity. Like there's no practical purpose to it. And I noticed in this shot, which should be really obvious, you can point out. So in the middle above the food stores, where you see the number 2, on the shelf thing above that is what hidden cameras look like in this. All the way on the right in this frame, you can just see a regular full-sized camera, which is probably like probably were using cameras like this most of the time. Like, that's how set up. This is like the boom mic in a shot kind of a moment thing. Like, nothing about this is even convincing. This is 100% all fake, obviously. It's supposed to be like concrete and riveted steel onto it, but like you can tell it's some kind of laminate thing, and it's peeling off, and it's probably on plywood, and the doors are probably foam, but you can say that's just a Hollywood thing, right? You can give them some leeway with like showmanship stuff. So another part of this that's really nonsensical in a way is the whole money thing. They have this money gimmick where there's an alarm that goes off and they have to press their hands on to these two switches to keep this alarm from counting down from 1 minute to 0. And if they don't, the giant pile of money burns. And you'll remember I mentioned they're in a confined space. You can get it takes like a few minutes to potentially get asphyxiated from smoke inhalation and die. So if like that's what they're talking about. I know that it's a fake, they're doing a fake effect thing, duh. But like if you tried to do this in real life, this would represent an extreme danger to anyone who occupied the dwelling. I know it's fake money, but it's also I think it's considered a federal crime to burn paper money. You are allowed to somewhat deface coins as a freedom of speech kind of thing. So they used to have these little things in malls and theme parks where you could put a penny in them and they would roll around and they would get smashed into like a token with a logo on it of whatever theme park. So like Disneyland or Knott's Berry Farm, or sometimes malls would have them, or whatever like that. So there's been legal ways that people have defaced money, but when it comes to paper money, in the United States it's just illegal to deface paper money almost unconditionally, partly because there's consequences to destroying money that's circulating. Like, it can affect the broader economy. So there's a reason why the government's kind of tight on that a little bit. It's harder to create that same kind of economic damage when you're talking about pennies in a coin machine and stuff. But I don't think anyone's actually ever gone to jail or been seriously punished for defacing money in the United States. At least I wasn't able to find a high profile case of it. But my main issue with this is, if this was legitimate, it's life threatening because of being in a very enclosed space. It's implied to be a low like bad circulation kind of environment. You could die very quickly if you didn't immediately evacuate. Or like if you struggled too much to evacuate. Obviously, another issue being that those doors are plexiglass for the money vault thing. So like you could literally go up to it and like bust it open. But like Hollywood, they make stuff like this. And I know this is a YouTube channel, but you know, this is showmanship kind of technique stuff. So a lot of people do this. It's like very common to build things in a cheap way that's convincing. But like this would actually be life-threatening. If you look at, okay, this is a hydroponics garden thing. It's like 2 shelves. So there are things that can grow within 30 to 70 days that are leafy green vegetables, where theoretically, because they're staying here supposedly for 100 days, you could harvest these like once or twice, possibly. It depends on the plant and how much of it you harvest, but they don't stay harvestable forever. So stuff like spinach, it grows too big and becomes super bitter eventually. If you don't, like, it eventually grows to a point where you can't really eat off of it anymore, even though you can harvest it repeatedly when it's grown enough. So these aren't going to just, like, there's no reality where plants like this are going to stay like that for 100 days. So it's already kind of semi-dead weight stuff. And it's a hydroponics garden. And these blue barrels have soil written on them. And so you can kind of see it on the barrel all the way on the left. You see the OIL. But why do you need soil for a hydroponics garden, right? Hydroponics gardens are just water. So why do they have barrels of soil inside here? Like, for what? There's, okay, an ethical issue. They're showing, like, this is the handprint thing to shut off the timer. An ethical issue I have is there's stealth advertising in this video. And so there's a difference between product placement and stealth advertising. So product placement is simply the presence of a product, like, in something. So they're clearly doing this. They do several sort of call outs for Feastables in a way that's very, very blatantly advertising. But there is also product placement. See, there's like Coca-Cola. It's in here, but no additional attention is being brought to it. That's what product placement is. When we're talking about advertising, it's stuff like this. And they're saying, oh, Feastables taste so good, available in all Walmarts. It's really blatant stealth advertising, but it's done enough so that it doesn't necessarily fully register in young children. Like if you're 8 to 10 or even younger, you know, like MrBeast is known for having this very young audience, and stuff like this can put a worm in their brain, and they can associate like eating chocolate with their favorite YouTuber or whatever, and then it can help contribute in a weird way to like bad eating habits and childhood obesity. And there's a write-up by the FTC about self-advertising in children and childhood obesity and candy being advertised to kids and stuff. So there's reasons to be legitimately concerned. Like, this isn't nothing. If I can find it, they do something even more blatant of like a straight up ad. Okay, it's like right here. Where MrBeast comes down and he goes, "Oh, I have a question. Do you think these taste better than Hershey's chocolate?" And they go, "Of course they taste better." And look, she holds it for the camera and everything. And, you know, they're like, "It's way better than Hershey's," and stuff like that. See, that's like really overt advertising in a way, but they're also trying to not admit it. And there's just something really scummy about it. You can tell this was one of the bigger tells you can tell this was shot in probably like a week. Everything was like a week, is because like the times my hair has been that short, like your hair gets really shaggy within a month. At least it was that way for me. And like, I'd probably need a haircut at least once a month. And we're talking about 100 days. So you go to day 70 and you look at the guy, and it's almost not noticeably any longer. Like maybe the sides are filled in a little bit or whatever, but it's not like, oh, that's day 40, but still like day 70. Okay, his hair is very consistent. Admittedly, it's slightly shorter here because of that, but it's like, my hair wouldn't be that short without a haircut for like 80 days. And hair tends to grow at least around ½ an inch a month. So like, it to me it seems like it should be longer than that, significantly. And they like cut his hair to distract from it not like matching up time scale wise, and they're pulling all his hair as straight out as possible to exaggerate the length too with a lot of parts of this. But like everyone else's hair doesn't change at all, basically. And I know the people not in the bunker can be getting haircuts. When you have long curly hair, my hair gets curly when it's long. Growth is a lot less obvious because your hair's curly. But I'm saying it's suspicious. It seems to suggest this was like, it couldn't have been more than a month. It was probably a week. So like they shot everything. And you'll notice, okay, he has a black t-shirt towards the beginning. Jimmy also had a black t-shirt. And in some of the... So, see, he has a black t-shirt. In the middle, he has a white t-shirt. So, he goes like black, white, black. It could, like, there's no reason to believe these days were shot in order. What they did probably is shot a bunch of events and then like had Jimmy change his shirt once or maybe twice. And then they might have shot all the parts where he has a black shirt at the same time, and then all the parts where he had a white shirt at the same time, or he changed his shirt twice or whatever. But they have this uniformed clothing to try to hide the actual time scale, because if they had regular clothes, they wouldn't be changing their clothes often enough for it to be obvious. There's also a part where there's like a chocolate cake, and it's a Feastables chocolate cake. And I mean, they push it hard. They push the whole Feastables thing like hard for being advertising that's not disclosed in any way inside this video. I don't know if I can find it. It was around day 50 where they do the Feastables cake thing. They do donuts with a melted Feastables bar on it, which again is to push advertising. I don't know if you could get oil hot enough on that electric cooking range they have next to the faulty nostalgic breakfast maker. See, so there was a barrel there that said soil on it. Like, why did they have soil? That greenery is... They do like a greenery thing to try to make it look like times passed and things have grown or whatever. But this is like very clearly special effects stuff. And it's like really, really bad special effects. Like it does not look like that. It looks more like that. They just did that in post, you know, and it seems like, oh, how could they do all that? It looks like what they did is they turned up the saturation really high and other crap, and colored things a bit maybe to get this like fakeness. So like manipulating the colors and actually doing effects and stuff. So not all of the shots necessarily, but definitely some of them have that weird. This is the hydroponics thing breaking supposedly or whatever. If you have to know how to take care of these things. Plants can die in them in a matter of days if you don't properly recycle the water, or you don't the water has to flow properly, and then you have to change the water once in a while because it's not like a river or like a larger, like it may not be something you have to worry about in a really large hydroponics farm, because you can have the water flow out entirely and new water flow back in eventually. Hydroponic farms like this aren't hooked up to a water source and like a drainage thing. So they just recycle the same water and it gets dirty and it can grow things in it that kill the plants. So you have to eventually empty them out and put clean water into them. And I assume add nutrients and stuff. But I don't have first-hand experience with this stuff. So they're difficult to take care of sometimes. There's also a fish tank. And if you know anything about fish tanks, like in the bedroom there's a fish tank. You have to clean out a fish tank. What I've heard is recommended is every 2 weeks. Right? So if you don't, stuff starts to build up. It's like under one of the beds. I believe it's under the bed on the right. And I'm pretty sure that mirror probably has an actual door behind it and they're covering it, because there's also a window in this room, and that's exactly like how a storm shelter would be. So assuming it's something repurposed like that. So it, like, nothing about this, like, the fish would be dead pretty quick probably, because I don't think the kids would be able to be on top of it, especially if the hydroponic farm's just gonna die that easily. But they don't really show the fish much, and I kind of hate to think, like, this is the Feastables donut thing. Like this is more advertising crap. I don't know if that cooking range could really heat up oil hot enough, because some electric cooking ranges like that, they like auto shut off for safety reasons, and it's already dangerous enough to like cook. So like cook in this environment. I think that's most of the stuff that I naturally noticed. Except for, okay, that kid, like, he has a bunch of tattoos. In America, you can't legally get tattoos unless you're 18 years old. So either he's 18 years old and kind of baby-faced and short, which I've known guys who are like 30 years old, they're Hispanic, they're baby-faced, they're like 5'4" or something. Like, I've worked with people like that, and they look like some teenage punk kid, but like they smoke and swear and stuff. So like I've met guys like that, but I'm pretty sure this is a kid with tattoos. The problem is, when you see a kid with tattoos, a lot of the times it's signs of like gang involvement. And I know that's kind of a stereotype, but it's something that's more often true than not, because you have to keep in mind it's illegal to get tattoos in the United States if you are under the age of 18. So they can only get tattoos in an illegal way. I don't think you can even have a parent consent for you for tattoos. I'm not sure about that. But it's because you can't, if you're a kid, you can't consent to a contract, and it's kind of related to that. And so there's certain things you're not allowed to do. So he seems kind of sketchy to me. But like, an easier way to explain all this is like, if I was gonna do this dishonestly, what would I do? I'd either find a gutted shelter, or I just buy like a storm drain thing and build a quick set into it. They clearly went with like a gutted shelter and built all this stuff inside of it. Like, those walls aren't normally there in shelters like this. It usually looks like a storm drain pipe. Because when you build interiors like this, you sacrifice inside, like, interior space. So you actually don't want to build on the inside of the pipe too much. You want to build insulation and stuff around the outside of the pipe. Because then you lose a ton of square footage on the inside the more you build on the inside. And it gets more cramped. And you want it to feel as open as possible. And you want as much room to store stuff as possible. So these interior walls wouldn't be here if this was being realistic. But I would build something like this. Probably what they did is inside of a gutted shelter. I would do some kind of casting call thing for 2 people. I would probably, like, he doesn't have to pay them more than like a few $1,000s if they're actors. And even that might be, like, if you work a week and you're some child actor and you get like $2,000 to $3,000. You know, there's a lot of people who make that kind of money in a month. So there would be a lot of people who jump on stuff like that. For like, you work a week and you get a few $1,000s and you get to be in a MrBeast video and you get to be famous or whatever. But what clearly makes them actors in some capacity is the shilling for Feastables thing. Like, there's nothing about that. I mean, aside from all the times they act very disingenuous in a way. It can be, like, I'm not saying, like, okay, look at this. They do these exaggerated expressions that if it should trigger this response in your brain that someone's being really patronizing to you because they think you're that stupid. They have to exaggerate a facial expression, and it can convince you. And that is something that actually pisses me off. You know, like being patronized to like that. Like that. You know, they do that for children's shows a lot. Now, all of this can be because of coaching, and they could be actual people, quote unquote. But it means there's a certain degree of them, like, coaching. They're doing ads, like, in the middle of the video, so they were directed what to say to do this advertisement to sell Feastables. They do this 3 or 4 times in the video. So stuff like that, like, they were likely very directed, even if they were real people. Right? There's no genuine reaction in this whole thing. And that's one of the things that kind of pisses me off more than anything else. But like, you hire some child actors, few $1,000s, all the money's fake anyways. You give them something for their resume to do other things as child actors. You know, I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying that that's a possible alternative explanation, right? That's something else that could have been done if they each got $350,000 or whatever. I'm not saying it's impossible, but if the easier alternative is just to hire child actors and coach them and pay them like 1% of the money that you say you'll supposedly give them, and it's an acting job, it's not a competition, right? Then, so it could be perfectly legal to do all this, right? It's all above board because it's an acting job. They're paid actors, right? Hypothetically, I'm saying. There's no proof that that's the case. But if they did do that, it could all be above board and legal, and there's mutual benefit potentially. So there are reasons why people would agree to this. But unless there's better disclosure, we're just never gonna know.